A wealthy CEO strolls into his bathroom and discovers a janitor snoozing on the toilet seat, instantly falling head over heels. Before we dive in, drop a comment sharing where you're tuning in from. Enjoy the tale. Emily Carter was at her breaking point. She had been pulling double shifts for a week, cleaning hotel rooms by day and covering the night shift for a slacker friend who always had a new excuse. Now, she was utterly spent, a walking zombie clutching a mop. The VIP suite was her last stop for the day. She just wanted to wrap up and head home. Moving at a snail's pace, she stepped into the lavish bathroom. It was the largest she had ever seen, roughly the size of her entire apartment. Wow, this place is a palace. Who needs a bathroom this big? Does it have an echo? She muttered, pouring disinfectant into the sink. She scrubbed, wiped, and washed. Exhaustion had her on autopilot, but the worst was yet to come. She bent down to clean around the bathtub, rested her head on her arm for just a second, and suddenly felt her body grow heavier. Just 5 seconds. Just 5. And then she dozed off, right there, resting on the toilet seat. Jake Mitchell had just wrapped up a grueling day of meetings. All he craved was silence and a hot shower. As soon as he entered his suite, he shed his suit and tie, unbuttoned his shirt, and headed straight for the bathroom, dreaming of the soothing steam. He opened the door without a glance and stepped inside. And that's when he nearly had a heart attack. What the hell? His voice echoed to the bathroom, almost shattering the mirrors. Jake jumped back. His heart raced as if he were being attacked by a weapon-wielding polar bear. There, leaning against the toilet seat, was a woman in a hotel uniform, fast asleep, in his bathroom. The shock was so intense that he almost threw his shirt at her like an exorcism. Emily, in turn, woke up to the most terrifying scream she had ever heard. She jolted awake, lost her balance, and tumbled to the floor, knocking over the cleaning supply bucket. Oh my God, what's happening? Jake stepped back as if she were a ghost crawling out of the drain. Who are you? And what are you doing in my room? Emily, completely disoriented, widened her eyes at the shirtless man in front of her. Tall, dark hair, intense expression, furious eyes, and incredibly handsome. She blinked a few times, trying to process everything. Big bathroom, expensive soap scent, housekeeping uniform, the guest's room. Reality hit her all at once. She froze. Then her eyes widened even more as she shouted, "I didn't rob you, I swear." Jake blinked. What? I just fell asleep here. No, that sounded bad. Emily raised her hands, as if a police officer had a gun pointed at her. I was just cleaning and you decided to take a nap in my bathroom? Or is your cleaning technique about napping in guest bathrooms, too? Emily stammered. She was in trouble. It's not exactly like that. I mean, it is, but... Jake pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to stay calm. So my bathroom is a dormitory now. It was a very quick nap. Oh, sure. Just a little 30-minute nap on the toilet seat. It was only 5 minutes. Do you have a stopwatch in your brain or something? Sir, I know this looks bad, but I work morning and night. My body just shut down. Jake took a deep breath. He wanted to be mad. He really did. But for some reason, the whole situation was so absurd that he just couldn't. She looked desperate, her face flushed with embarrassment, her hair a mess, and staring at him as if her life depended on this moment. And then Jake did something completely unexpected. He crossed his arms and walked out of the bathroom toward the kitchen. Emily quickly followed. He stopped, turned to her with a serious expression, and asked, "Do you drink coffee?" Emily blinked. Huh? Coffee? Do you drink it? Yes. But what does that have to do with? He grabbed a cup from the counter and handed it to her. Try it. Still confused, Emily took the cup and smelled the coffee. She immediately made a face. This is terrible. Jake raised an eyebrow. You could tell just by the smell? Emily hesitated. Yes. A curious glint passed through his eyes. Jake Mitchell, the man who never cared about anything other than business, was intrigued. And Emily, who just wanted to get out of there with her job intact, had no idea what was coming next. Emily was still holding the coffee cup, like it was a bomb about to explode. Jake watched her with an unreadable expression, arms crossed, his intense gaze locked onto her. She had no idea what to do. "So am I fired?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake tilted his head, as if considering the idea. "I haven't decided yet." Emily felt her knees go weak. "You haven't?" He took the cup back and looked at the dark liquid inside. "Before that, explain to me how you knew this coffee was terrible without even tasting it." It's just obvious," she replied, frowning. "It smells burnt, and the beans were over-roasted, which makes it too bitter. Looks like someone tried to cover it up with sugar, but that only made it worse." Jake raised his eyebrows. "And you figured all that out just from the smell?" Emily opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated. Wait, why was he so interested in this? "I swear I don't do this all the time." She tried to play it down. "I just noticed." Jake was silent for a few seconds, watching her like she was a complicated puzzle he needed to solve. And then, out of nowhere, he stepped back and leaned against the counter. "Perfect." "Perfect? You're going to help me fix this problem." Emily blinked. "I'm going to what?" "The hotel's coffee is awful. I've complained, but no one can fix it. If you can tell what's wrong just by the smell, then maybe you can figure out what's wrong with the other dishes, too." Emily let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, sure, because that's exactly what a cleaning staff member does." "As of now, yes." She froze. "Sorry, but I just do cleaning. I have nothing to do with food." Jake shrugged. "Now you do." Emily looked at him like he had just suggested she jump out of a plane without a parachute. "I can't just suddenly become a food expert. But you don't have to." He pointed at the cup. "You already are." Emily opened and closed her mouth, feeling more confused by the second. He had to be joking, right? But his expression said he wasn't. "Sir? Mitchell? Right? Right. Look, I appreciate it. But I need my job." Jake frowned. "And who said I'm firing you?" Emily stayed quiet for a moment. So that was just a test. She was sure she was about to lose her job, and now the hotel CEO was asking for her help with food. None of it made sense. "This isn't a test, is it? Like, if I say no, are you going to fire me?" Jake sighed, already looking tired of the conversation. "If I were going to fire you, I would have done it already. Now come on, you've got a breakfast to taste." Emily blinked. Then again, and a third time. "What? Do you want to keep arguing or just get this over with?" She knew she should say no, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the fact that he still hadn't let her go. Maybe she had a chance to save her job. Emily sighed. "Fine, but if this is just a plan to fire me later, I swear. Less drama, more coffee." Emily had no idea how she even got here. 1 minute, she was arguing in the CEO's bathroom. The next, she was sitting at one of the best tables in the hotel restaurant, with a table full of fancy dishes in front of her. Dishes she was supposed to taste. Jake sat across from her, arms crossed. "All right, try them and tell me what you think." She looked at the plates, then back at him. "You want me to eat all this?" "You work double shifts, right? When was the last time you ate?" Emily opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't remember. The silence was enough for Jake to get his answer. "Exactly. Now eat." Emily hesitated, then picked up a fork and tried the first dish. She made a face. "The sauce is too acidic." "It feels like they used too much lemon to cover up something that went wrong," Emily remarked. Jake nodded, as if that confirmed his suspicions. Next, she tried a piece of meat and wrinkled her nose. "Overcooked, and they use a seasoning that doesn't go with the dish at all." Another plate. "Is this supposed to be sweet or savory? Because right now it's just confusing." Jake leaned back in his chair, intrigued. She didn't just notice the mistakes. She described exactly what was wrong. And for the first time in a long while, he was impressed. Emily wiped her mouth and looked at him. "Okay, can I go now?" Jake tilted his head. "Have you ever thought about working with food?" Emily laughed. "You mean eating bad food?" "No, identifying it." Emily stopped laughing. "What?" "You have a rare talent. Most people wouldn't even catch half the mistakes you just pointed out. It's just a silly trick. It doesn't mean anything." Jake stared at her for a long moment, like she just said the most ridiculous thing in the world. I bet people have said the same thing about you before. Emily opened her mouth, but had no words. He was right. Jake stood up, adjusting his sleeves. Tomorrow morning, you're coming with me to the kitchen. I want you to taste a few ingredients. Emily's eyes widened. What? And don't try to run. I know where you work. Emily nearly fell out of her chair. Are you insane? For the first time that night, Jake laughed. Not yet, but give it time. Emily spent the entire night trying to make sense of what had just happened. She should have been fired. In fact, any normal person would have been kicked out of the hotel immediately for being caught sleeping on the CEO's toilet seat. But somehow, not only did she still have her job, she was now caught up in some random plan to improve the hotel's breakfast. Did it make sense? No. Did she want to be part of it? Also no. But Jake Mitchell didn't seem like the kind of man who accepted no as an answer. So the next morning, there she was, dragging herself to the hotel kitchen, exhausted and mentally begging herself not to do anything that would get her officially fired. She pushed open the kitchen door and saw Jake standing next to the head chef. The CEO glanced at his watch, then at her. You're late. Emily sighed. If you're going to fire me, just do it now. I only got 3 hours of sleep. Jake smirked. You'll survive. Now come here. The head chef, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Marco, eyed her suspiciously. This is a cleaning lady. He crossed his arms. What is she doing here? Saving the hotel's breakfast, Jake answered flatly. Marco frowned. With all due respect, Mr. Mitchell, my team is highly trained. I don't think we need a cleaner's opinion. Emily froze. She already felt out of place being here. Now she had to deal with a chef who saw her as a joke. Jake, however, didn't even blink. I tasted the food yesterday. If your team was as qualified as you say, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The silence that followed was so heavy that Emily wanted to disappear under the counter. Marco clenched his jaw, clearly irritated. And what exactly does Miss Carter have to say about my kitchen? Jake gestured toward Emily. Find out for yourself. Emily froze. What? You said the coffee was terrible. Now tell me what's wrong with the other dishes. Marco let out a sarcastic laugh. Great. Let's hear what the mop expert has to say. Emily felt her face heat up. What an unbearable man. But if he wanted a show, she would give him one. Taking a deep breath, Emily grabbed a spoon and tasted one of the dishes. She chewed slowly, analyzing every flavor. The scrambled eggs are dry. You use low-quality butter and the salt is off. Marco crossed his arms. What else? Emily picked up a piece of bread and took a bite. The bread isn't fresh. Either it was baked yesterday or stored poorly. All right. And the juice. She took a glass and sipped. She winced. This is a disaster. Marco raised an eyebrow. And why is that? Because someone mixed fresh orange juice with store-bought and added a generous touch of disappointment. Jake bit back a smile. Marco, on the other hand, looked ready to explode. All right, Miss Carter. If you're so smart, what do you suggest? Emily looked at him for a moment, then turned to Jake. Can I speak freely or am I risking my life? Jake chuckled. Speak freely. Emily turned back to Marco. This is a 5-star hotel. Guests expect high-quality food, but breakfast tastes like an airport cafeteria. If you want my opinion, you need to upgrade the ingredients. Real butter, fresh bread, farm eggs. The chef clenched his jaw. That costs money. And bad food costs customers. Marco turned red. Jake, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying himself. Then it's settled. We'll test Miss Carter's suggestions. Marco looked like he was about to swallow a bucket of boiling oil. This is an insult. I have years of experience. And this girl just came from cleaning. Jake shrugged, and yet she managed to point out every issue with your food in under 5 minutes. The chef snapped his mouth shut. Jake turned to Emily. Well done. Now go get some rest. Emily left the restaurant, feeling like she had just run a marathon. But for the first time, she felt like she had done something important. Even if it was just fixing breakfast. Emily was folding sheets in the laundry room when Sarah burst in, out of breath. Emily! Emily looked up. What is it? People are saying you humiliated the chef in front of the CEO. Emily grimaced. I just told the truth. Sarah's eyes widened. And he let you walk out alive? More or less. Sarah grabbed her by the shoulders. Are you sleeping with him? Emily choked on her own saliva. What? People are saying he promoted you because you two are having an affair. Emily buried her face in her hands. I'm going to disappear under the sheets and never come out. But before she could do that, the laundry room door opened. Marco walked in. Miss Carter. Emily swallowed hard. Hi. Marco took a deep breath. I wanted to say that I was an idiot this morning. Emily froze. Huh. You were right. We changed the breakfast ingredients, and the guests loved it. Emily blinked, trying to understand if she had heard correctly. Marco was apologizing. He held out his hand. Can I count on your opinion when we try new dishes? Emily looked at his hand, then at Sarah, who looked even more shocked than she was. With a sigh, she shook the chef's hand. As long as I don't have to wash the dishes afterward. Marco laughed. Deal. Sarah held back a squeal. Emily didn't know how, but she had just earned a new role at the hotel, and she had no idea where it would lead. Emily still couldn't believe what had happened that morning. She, a simple housekeeping staff member, had managed to challenge the hotel's head chef, fix breakfast, and somehow survive the experience. Not just survive, she was now officially someone people listened to when it came to food. But that also meant the rumors were spreading like wildfire in the hotel halls. What started as Emily slept in the CEO's bathroom quickly turned into Emily and the CEO had a private moment in the bathroom. And by noon, it had escalated to Emily as having a secret affair with the boss, and now has free access to the kitchen. She tried to ignore the curious stares and the whispers behind her back as she changed the sheets in one of the rooms. But it wasn't working. So you're the hotel's new favorite now? The irritating voice of Jessica, one of the receptionists, made Emily sigh before even turning around. I'm the new official tester of bad food. That's all. Jessica crossed her arms. Funny, no one has ever been promoted this fast in this hotel. You must have done something really special to get Mr. Mitchell's attention like that. Emily rolled her eyes. Do I need to spell out? I slept in his bathroom, and instead of firing me, he made me taste bad coffee. That's the whole story. Jessica raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. Sure, I'm sure that's all it was. Emily took a deep breath. Look, I'd love to stay and listen to your crazy theories, but I actually have a job to do. Excuse me. She grabbed her cleaning cart and pushed it down the hall before Jessica could say anything else. The only thing Emily wanted now was for Jake to leave her alone. Hopefully, he had already forgotten his ridiculous idea of making her try more dishes and would let her go back to her normal life. But she should have known. Jake Mitchell never forgot anything. Late in the afternoon, just as she was about to leave and finally get some rest, Emily received a message from Sarah. Chef Marco wants to talk to you in the kitchen. You'd better go before he throws you into the soup pot. Emily sighed. This never ends. When she got to the kitchen, Marco was waiting with his arms crossed. But this time, he didn't look like he was ready to attack her. Mr. Mitchell wants to see you in the restaurant. Now. Emily sighed again. He never gets tired, does he? Marco smirked. You're still breathing, so I guess not. Resigned, she made her way to the restaurant, where she found Jake sitting at a table, studying a menu with the same intensity as someone making stock market decisions. I should start charging for these consultations, Emily said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without waiting for an invitation. Jake looked up at her. Very funny. I try. He set the menu aside and looked at her for a moment. I have a proposal for you. Emily blinked. That doesn't sound good. You like it? I doubt it. Jake ignored her and went on. There's a major food event happening in Paris next week, one of the biggest in the world. Emily just stared at him, waiting for the part that made sense. Okay, and I want you to come with me. She blinked again. I what? You heard me. I want you to come with me. She let out a laugh, not believing what she was hearing. Wait. You wanted to go with you to some fancy food event in Paris? Exactly. She laughed even harder. I'm a housekeeper, Mitchell. I clean rooms and scrub toilets. You want to go to Paris just to tell you if a dish is bad. Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his expression serious. You have a special talent, a refined palate, something most people don't have. I want you to help me identify the best chefs and ingredients. Emily shook her head, still in disbelief. I don't even know where to start with how crazy this is. First, I shouldn't even be here. Second, who says I actually know what I'm doing? I do. She opened her mouth to argue, but the conviction in his eyes stopped her. He believed in her, and that made her uncomfortable. I can't accept. Jake frowned. Why not? Because it's ridiculous. I don't know anything about these events. I didn't either the first time I went. She scoffed. That's different. You're a CEO and you have a gift. Emily didn't know what to say. Had anyone ever said something like that to her before? Had anyone ever believed she was truly good at something? She lowered her gaze to the table. I have a job here. I'll pay you twice what you make at the hotel. Her eyes widened in surprise. What? It's only fair considering you'll be helping me. She still couldn't believe this was happening. I can't just drop everything. You don't have to. It's just a 3-day trip. Emily bit her lip, tried to ignore the feeling that she was walking into a trap. But at the same time, when would she ever get an opportunity like this again? I need to think. Jake nodded. That's fine, but don't take too long. Emily left the restaurant feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Was she really considering this? Was she crazy enough to travel with Jake Mitchell? Maybe she was, but she wasn't ready to admit it yet. She spent the rest of the day trying to push the thought away. She focused on her work, folding bed linens, cleaning rooms. But every time someone mentioned Jake Mitchell's name, a strange chill ran down her spine. Had he really made that ridiculous offer? Her? In Paris? As if she were someone important? As if she were someone who mattered to him beyond being just an employee who, by sheer accident, had caught his attention? Every time she thought about it, the most logical explanation came to mind. He was messing with her. There was no other reason. And yet, when her shift ended and she returned to her small rented apartment, she collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. The trip was in 3 days. 3 days. If she said yes, she'd be boarding a plane with Jake, go to an event where she knew no one, didn't understand the rules, and would probably feel like a complete fool. But if she said no, Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For years, she had been told she wasn't good enough for anything other than hard labor. No one had ever looked at her and said, "You're talented." No one had ever believed in her. And now Jake Mitchell, the CEO of the hotel, was saying she was special, that he wanted her by his side, helping him pick the best chefs and dishes, even if it was a mistake, even if he was wrong. For the first time, Emily wanted to believe that maybe there was something inside her that was worth something. And before she could change her mind, she picked up her phone and typed a message. "Okay, I'm in." Seconds later, his reply arrived. "Great. Get ready for the trip." She let out a long sigh. What on earth was she doing? The day of the trip arrived faster than Emily expected. She woke up before her alarm, packed her bag with clothes borrowed from Sarah, because, according to her friend, if you're traveling with a billionaire, at least try to look rich, and headed to the airport with sweaty palms. Jake was waiting in the VIP lounge, dressed impeccably as always. He looked completely at ease, as if this were just another ordinary day for him. For Emily, it felt completely surreal. "You're on time. That's a miracle." Emily rolled her eyes. "I thought about running away, but my bank account convinced me to stay." Jake chuckled. That's the spirit. Before she could overthink it, she was being led onto the plane. But of course, this wasn't just any plane. She had flown before, but always crammed into economy class, hoping she wouldn't end up next to someone snoring. Now, she was on a private jet with soft leather seats, real food being served, and enough space to dance if she wanted to. Okay, she said, looking around. This is way nicer than the flying buses I'm used to. Jake gave a small smile. Good to know I'm already impressing you. Emily sank into the seat and let out a sigh. You don't need to impress me, Mitchell. You just need to make sure I don't embarrass myself in Paris. No promises. She turned to look at him. You really enjoy torturing me, don't you? One of my favorite pastimes. The plane took off, and Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the butterflies in her stomach. She was really going to Paris with Jake Mitchell. Nothing in her life had ever been this surreal. The hotel they were staying at looked like something out of a movie. Gold-trimmed furniture, sparkling chandeliers, luxurious carpets. Everything looked so expensive that Emily was afraid to touch anything. But the worst was yet to come. That night, Jake took her to an exclusive dinner before the main event, and that's when Emily realized just how deep she was in trouble. Everyone in the room seemed to belong to a world she would never be part of. Women in long gowns and dangerously high heels, men in tailored suits, all holding wine glasses and speaking French like movie stars. Emily, in her borrowed dress, felt like a complete fraud among them. Jake, on the other hand, looked right at home. He moved through the room effortlessly, greeting important people, chatting with renowned chefs, while Emily tried to act like she knew what she was doing. But then, the moment she feared arrived. Miss Carter, right? A middle-aged man approached, smiling politely. Emily blinked. Yes? Jake mentioned you have a special talent for identifying flavors. She shot a deadly glare at Jake, who only smiled like he was completely innocent. The man picked up a wine glass and handed it to her. Then tell us, what year is this wine from? Emily looked at the glass as if it were poison. Jake just crossed his arms, clearly enjoying himself. Don't look at me like that. This is part of your job now. Gritting her teeth, Emily took a small sip. The wine was strong, full-bodied, but there was something different about it. She analyzed the taste and, without thinking, said, this was aged in oak barrels, but there's a fruity note. It must be a recent vintage, maybe 3 years old. The man's eyes widened. Exactly. Emily froze. What? You got it right. Jake smiled, satisfied. See? I knew you were good at this. Emily looked at the glass like the wine had just revealed the secrets of the universe. Had she really gotten it right? Maybe. Maybe being here wasn't such a mistake. After all, the dinner continued, with Emily being introduced to more and more people, and with each dish she tasted, her confidence grew just a little more. By the end of the night, as they were heading back to the hotel, Jake turned to her with an amused smile. I admit it. You surprised me. Emily scoffed. I surprised myself. He stopped in front of her and tilted his head. So? Still think you don't belong in this world? She stared at him for a long moment. For the first time, she didn't know how to answer. Maybe she did belong. Maybe she had spent too much time thinking she wasn't good enough. Jake studied her for a few more seconds before giving a small smile. You got talent, Carter. And now that I know that, I'm not letting you slip away. Emily felt a shiver run through her. Jake Mitchell never said anything by accident, and suddenly she realized this trip could change much more than her career. It could change everything. Emily woke up the next morning feeling like she was still dreaming. She was in Paris, in a 5-star hotel, traveling with a billionaire CEO who, for some inexplicable reason, thought she had talent. If someone had told her that a week ago, she would have laughed in their face and told them to get help. But here she was, lying in the most comfortable bed she had ever slept in, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how her life had flipped upside down so quickly. Sighing, she got up and walked over to the window. The view of the city was breathtaking. Historic buildings, busy streets, charming cafes. Everything looked like it came out of a movie. And she, Emily Carter, was right there in the middle of all of it. A notification sound made her grab her phone. It was a message from Jake. Breakfast at 8. Don't be late. Emily rolled her eyes. Not even in Paris does he give a break. But despite mentally complaining, she took a quick shower, got dressed, and went downstairs to meet him. Jake was already sitting at a table in the hotel restaurant, reading something on his phone. Do you always arrive first everywhere? He looked up and gave her a smirk. Some call it punctuality, others call it efficiency. She sat down and picked up the menu. And I call it unbearable. He laughed. The waiter approached, and Jake ordered a black coffee. Emily, on the other hand, ordered a croissant and hot chocolate. You're not a coffee fan? Jake asked, raising an eyebrow. I like it, but we're in Paris. Hot chocolate here is practically a work of art. He didn't argue, just watched as she took her first sip and closed her eyes, sighing. My God, this is good. Jake smiled, shaking his head. You really take food seriously. You brought me here for that, didn't you? True. They had breakfast without rushing, and Emily noticed that, for the first time, his company didn't seem so strange. It was almost natural. When they were finished, Jake paid and stood up. We got a busy day ahead. Don't tell me I'm going to have to try more mysterious wine. He laughed. Today is about food. We'll be doing tastings with some of the best chefs in France. Emily's eyes widened. That sounds intense. You'll survive. She scoffed but walked alongside him. The tastings took place in a private room of the food event, where renowned chefs prepared dishes for a select group of guests. Emily tried dishes she never even imagined existed. Refined flavors, sophisticated techniques, and to her own surprise, she realized she actually knew what she was doing. She pointed out small mistakes, identified secret ingredients, and even suggested improvements that made a few chefs raise their eyebrows in surprise. Jake watched her the whole time, his gaze a mix of satisfaction and curiosity. When the event ended, they were walking through the hall when an elegant woman approached. Tall, blonde, wearing a tight, expensive dress, with a smile that radiated absolute confidence. Emily didn't know who she was, but she immediately recognized the type. Someone from Jake's world. Jake Mitchell, the woman said, smiling. Long time no see. Jake smiled politely. Madeline, didn't expect to see you here. Paris is my second home, darling. And you, she glanced at Emily, got yourself some new company? Emily felt a shiver run down her spine at the way the woman assessed her from head to toe. Emily Carter, Jake said casually, she's working with me. Madeline smiled, but Emily noticed a subtle spark of disdain. Oh, how interesting. And how exactly is she working with you? Emily felt her stomach churn. She knew exactly what that question implied. Jake noticed too and furrowed his brow. Emily has a special talent for flavors. She's helping me evaluate the dishes at the event. Madeline feigned surprise. How curious. I could have sworn she was, well, something completely different. Emily clenched her fists. She knew exactly what the woman was implying. Jake noticed her expression and placed a hand gently on her back. A small but protective gesture. It was good to see you, Madeline, he said, ending conversation. Madeline threw one last glance at Emily before smiling and walking away. Emily let out the breath she didn't even realize she'd been holding. Jake looked at her. Ignore it. She crossed her arms. You caught what she was implying, right? Yes. And that's why I shouldn't be here. Jake stopped, gently holding her arm so she would look at him. You're here because you have talent. What others think doesn't matter. Emily bit her lip, looking away. Easy for you to say. You're a billionaire. And you're smart, so stop worrying. She wanted to believe him. But part of her knew that people like Madeline would never see someone like her as anything more than an outsider. Later that night, when Emily was alone at the hotel bar, she saw Madeline talking to Jake across the room, and to her dismay, they looked pretty close. She shouldn't care. It didn't make sense to care. But when Madeline touched Jake's arm and he smiled, Emily felt something twist inside her. She got up and left the room before she could figure out what it was. Minutes later, she was in her room, sitting on the bed, trying to convince herself that it was nothing. But her heart didn't believe it. And for the first time, Emily realized that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to feel something for Jake Mitchell. Emily spent the whole night trying to ignore the unease in her chest. She didn't care. Or at least, that's what she kept telling herself as she turned over in bed. trying to find a comfortable position to sleep. But every time she closed her eyes, the image of Jake and Madeline talking would pop into her mind. The way the woman touched his arm, the way he smiled at her, how they seemed to belong to the same world. What was Emily doing there? She felt like a child playing in an executive's office, a background character in a movie starring rich, sophisticated people. And now that she was there, she felt like everyone was just waiting for her to make a mistake, so they could kick her out. And maybe that's exactly what she should do. When the sun rose, Emily got up with a decision made. She grabbed her phone and typed a message to Jake. "I think I'd better go home. Thanks for the opportunity, but I don't belong in this world." She stared at the screen for a moment before hitting send. Now just wait. But the response came too quickly. "Meet me at the restaurant in 10 minutes. Emily sighed. Great. She dressed reluctantly and went downstairs to the restaurant. She found Jake sitting at the table drinking coffee, with a very unhappy look on his face. "Good morning," she said, sitting across from him. "You think you can just send me a message like that and run away?" "I'm not running away. I'm being realistic." He crossed his arms. "Realistic?" "Yes. Look, Jake, I appreciate everything you've done, but it doesn't make sense for me to stay here." He stared at her for a long moment before tilting his head. "This is about Madeline?" Emily felt her stomach drop. "What?" "No, of course not." Jake smirked. "You disappeared right after you saw us talking." "I was just tired." "Carter, you're not good at lying." She rolled her eyes, grabbing a piece of bread and spreading butter on it. "Trying to act indifferent. It has nothing to do with that. I just think it was a mistake to accept this trip." "Why?" She dropped the bread and looked at him. "Because I'm not like you, Jake. I'm not sophisticated. I don't speak French. I don't know how to act at these events. You saw the way Madeline looked at me, the way everyone looks at me." Jake sighed, rubbing his face. "So that's it? You want to quit just because a few snobby people can't handle the fact that you're more talented than they are?" "I'm not more talented than anyone." "You are." Emily stayed silent. Jake leaned over the table, his gaze intense. "You think I brought you here for nothing? I don't waste my time with people who have no value." She felt her heart race. He rarely complimented anyone. He rarely said anything that direct. And damn, it made her want to believe him. But then Jake stood up and threw a card on the table. "You have until noon to decide. If you want to leave, there's a flight back home reserved for you. But if you want to stay, meet me in the main hall at 3 p.m. Emily looked at the card, then at him. Jake watched her for a moment before leaving the restaurant. She took a deep breath. Now what? Staying meant continuing to deal with a world that didn't accept her. But leaving meant admitting she was running away. And Emily Carter never ran from anything. When the clock struck 3, she was in the main hall. Jake didn't smile when he saw her, but there was something satisfied in his expression. "Good. Now stop acting like you don't deserve to be here and come with me." And Emily, for the first time since she arrived, decided she was going to do just that. That afternoon's event was one of the most important of the food conference. Jake had meetings with investors, and Emily had to attend a panel about new talents in international cuisine. She was determined to soak up everything she could, listen to the experts, pay attention to the details, try to understand what made a dish truly memorable. But while she was making mental notes, she overheard 2 women whispering behind her. "Did you see that girl with Jake Mitchell?" "Yeah. They say he picked up a cleaning lady and brought her to Paris." Emily felt her face flush. Must be some kind of whim of his. Or maybe she has something special he likes, if you know what I mean. The 2 women laughed. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She wasn't going to let it bother her. She wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, she turned around with a sweet smile and said, in a friendly tone, "Oh, thank you for caring so much about my life. I'd love to continue this conversation, but I need to get back to the panel. After all, I'm actually here working. Can you say the same?" The 2 women were left speechless. Emily blinked, turned around, and went back to paying attention to the panel, feeling much better. She didn't have time to worry about small people. When she met Jake at the end of the event, he noticed something different about her. What happened? She smiled. I think I finally understand why I'm here. He raised an eyebrow. And why is that? Because I'm good at this. Jake smirked. Finally, Emily felt light. For the first time she was there, not because he chose her, but because she chose to be there. And that changed everything. Emily never thought she could feel so comfortable in a place that, just a few days ago, seemed completely out of her reach. But there she was, sitting next to Jake, evaluating dishes with some of the world's top food critics, and for the first time not feeling like she was in the wrong place. She still attracted attention. That was inevitable. People still whispered when she walked by. They still looked at her like she was an outsider for being there. But now Emily didn't care anymore. And somehow, that seemed to bother people more than if she had just given up and left. The night came quickly, and Jake organized a dinner at an exclusive restaurant for a few guests. The setting was elegant, the food impeccable, and the wine flowing freely. Emily tried to follow the conversations around her, but realized she didn't have to try so hard anymore. She could already identify which ingredients were used in each dish. She could recognize the technical details of the preparations she was learning, and Jake knew it. You're more confident, he said after the waiter served dessert. Do I seem more confident, or am I finally? Jake smiled. Both. She picked up her fork and cut a piece of the dessert in front of her. What's wrong? You look surprised. Just satisfied. Why? He leaned a bit toward the table, eyes fixed on her. Because I knew you were good at this. I was just waiting for you to realize it too. Emily felt warmth rise in her face, but covered it up by taking a sip of wine. The dinner continued normally until Madeline arrived. As always, she looked like she stepped out of a fashion magazine, flawless and confident. She sat down at the table as if she were the hostess of the night and shot a sharp smile at Emily. Darling, what a surprise to see you here. Emily smiled back. I'm not a surprise anymore. I'm starting to become part of this world. Madeline raised her eyebrows. Is that what you think? Jake cleared his throat, interrupting their exchange of barbs. What brings you here, Madeline? She grabbed a glass of wine, swirled the liquid in the glass, and smiled. A friendly warning. Emily crossed her arms. Oh, that sounds interesting. Please go on. Madeline's eyes rested on Jake. You know this world is a game, and as much as you like to bring challenges to yourself, there are things that simply don't fit in it. Emily noticed the quick glance the blonde threw her way. Jake remained unfazed. Madeline, I'm tired of your little games. If you have something to say it already. The woman smiled, leaning slightly forward. Have you ever stopped to think about how this might hurt your image? Bringing a cleaning lady to Paris, introducing her as if she's some kind of expert. People talk, Jake. And believe me, not everyone is happy about it. Emily felt her blood boil, but before she could respond, Jake spoke up. Who cares about what they say? Madeline laughed as if he were too naive. You, darling, deep down you've always cared. You wouldn't have gotten where you are if you didn't know how to play this game. Jake held her gaze for a moment and then smiled slyly. Funny, I always thought the game was about talent. And Emily has that in spades. Madeline rolled her eyes. You really think that's enough? Emily, who had been holding herself back until then, decided it was time to speak up. Madeline, let me ask you something. The blonde stared at her, surprised that she was jumping into the conversation so directly. What exactly bothers you so much? The fact that I'm here? Or the fact that you can't bring me down? The silence that followed was almost palpable. Madeline briefly hardened her expression, but quickly recovered with a smile. You think you're so smart, don't you? I am smart, and you know that. Jake watched the exchange with a glint of amusement in his eyes. Madeline took a deep breath and looked at him again. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. She stood up, adjusted her dress, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Emily sighed and picked up her glass of wine. If she's going to be a recurring problem, I'll need a raise. Jake laughed, grabbing his own glass and raising it. You're already negotiating salary? I'm learning fast. He smiled and they toasted. But Emily knew this wasn't over. Madeline wasn't the kind of woman to just accept losing. And somehow, Emily felt like this was just the first visible threat. Because if there was one thing she had learned about this world, it was that enemies never attacked head-on. They waited. They planned. And when you least expected it, they brought you down. Emily wasn't going to let that happen. She was ready to fight. Emily noticed something had changed after that night. It wasn't just Madeline. The whole atmosphere around her seemed different. Before, people looked at her with curiosity, as if waiting for her to fail. Now the hostility was open. She had become a problem. And it didn't take long for her to feel it in her bones. The next day at an exclusive food event, she and Jake entered the hall. And immediately, the whispers started. But this time, it wasn't just quiet mutterings. People were speaking openly. I heard she was a maid at his hotel. He brought an amateur to Paris and pretended she was an expert. Of course, there's another reason she's here. Emily felt her anger rise, but she tried to stay calm. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. Jake, on the other hand, wasn't calm at all. He gritted his teeth and shot a hard look at the people around them, who quickly turned their eyes away, pretending they weren't gossiping. Carter, ignore them. Easy for you to say. He looked at her, his tone firm. You want to prove you belong here? Then act like you don't care about these idiots. The only way to win this game is not to play by their rules. Emily took a deep breath. He was right. If she acted like those words mattered, she'd be proving they were right. She lifted her chin, ignored the stares, and walked confidently through the room, beside Jake. But the real surprise of the night came when they were introduced to one of the world's top food critics, Jean-Pierre Moreau. Mr. Mitchell, a pleasure to see you again. The man, an elderly Frenchman with sharp eyes, shook Jake's hand before turning to Emily. And you must be Emily Carter. She blinked, surprised. You've heard of me? Oh, mon cher, the whole of Paris has heard of you. Jake had a smile while Emily tried to mask her shock. The whole of Paris? Moreau laughed at her expression. People love a scandal, especially when it challenges the system. But I prefer facts. He handed Emily a tasting plate. So tell me, what do you think of this dish? Her heart raced. Everyone around them stopped to watch. She picked up her fork, tasted the food, and closed her eyes, analyzing every flavor. She took a deep breath and said, confidently, the dish is technically flawless, but it's predictable. The sauce is classic, but it's missing a bit of freshness. Maybe a citrusy touch to balance the richness. Silence. Emily held her breath, waiting for laughs or mocking looks. But Moreau smiled. Interesting. She blinked. Interesting. How? He handed the plate back to the waiter and crossed his arms. Because you're right. More silence. This time there were no mocking eyes. There was respect. Jake smiled, pleased. I told you she was good. Moreau nodded, looking impressed. Mademoiselle Carter, I'll be watching your career with great interest. He walked away, and Emily finally exhaled, not even realizing she'd been holding her breath. Jake leaned in close to her and whispered, Now, they know you're not playing around. She didn't know if she felt relief or if more weight was on her shoulders. But for the first time, she felt like she'd won a battle. The problem was, when you start winning a dangerous game, people played dirtier. And Emily had no idea what was about to happen. The next morning, she received a message from an unknown number. If you want to know the truth about Jake Mitchell, come to the hotel bar. 3 p.m. alone. She frowned. What the hell was that? She immediately forwarded the message to Jake, but the response was quick and unexpected. Don't go. Emily looked at her phone, feeling a shiver run down her spine. If Jake didn't want her to go, it meant there was something there, and she needed to find out. So at 3 p.m., she was in the hotel bar, waiting. Then Madeline showed up. Oh, so you came. Emily crossed her arms. I'm curious. Madeline sat down and grabbed a glass of wine. You're smart, Carter, but you still don't know this world. And you think you're going to teach me? The blonde laughed, shaking her head. I don't need to teach you anything. I just need to show you something. She took her phone, swiped the screen, and turned it to Emily. It was a picture of Jake with Madeline. what seemed to be a romantic dinner. Emily felt her stomach drop. What's this? A dinner, dear. You think you're the first woman Jake picks up and brings to Paris. Emily pressed her lips together. What do you mean by that? Madeline smiled, leaning over the table. Don't you get it? You're just a whim to him. Emily wanted to laugh. She knew Madeline was manipulative. She knew she wanted her to doubt Jake. But, on the other hand, why had he never mentioned Madeline? Why had he never explained what their relationship was? Madeline noticed a hesitation and smiled. Leave while you still can, before he discards you. Emily stood up, grabbing her bag. Thanks for concern, Madeline, but if Jake wants to discard me, he'll have to face me and say it to my face. She left without looking back, but her heart was racing because, for the first time, a doubt had been planted, and she needed to know the truth. That night, when she returned to the hotel, Jake was waiting for her in the hallway. I told you not to go. Emily crossed her arms, and I went anyway. His eyes sparkled with a mix of frustration and amusement. I don't know if I admire you or want to lock you in a room until this trip is over. Good luck trying. He sighed and rubbed his neck. What did she say to you? Emily watched him for a moment before speaking. That I'm just a whim of yours. Jake froze. She noticed the subtle clench of his jaw, but he quickly regained his composure. And you believed it? She hesitated. I want to hear it from you. He stared at her for a long moment before stepping forward. Carter, if I wanted any woman by my side, I would have chosen one who didn't challenge me all the time. Her heart skipped a beat. So what am I to you? Jake looked at her as if the question was ridiculous. You're the woman who makes me break every rule I've set for myself. Emily felt the air leave her, but before she could respond, he leaned in a little closer and whispered, and that scares me more than anything. She was speechless. Because of all the answers she had imagined, that was the one she didn't expect. Emily felt her heart pounding so hard that she was sure Jake could hear it. She didn't expect that response. She didn't expect him to be so direct. And most of all, she didn't expect him to leave her speechless. Jake Mitchell, the serious, methodical CEO, had just admitted that she completely messed up his life. The worst part? Emily knew he was telling the truth. But instead of feeling happy, a wave of confusion washed over her. She never planned this. She never wanted to fall for someone like him. And now there she was, standing in front of him, not knowing what to do. Jake looked at her like he was waiting for a response, but she just couldn't speak. So after what felt like long seconds of silence, he stepped back. You better get some rest. His voice was controlled, but Emily noticed something different in his tone. Disappointment. And it hit her like a punch. Jake was never one to show emotions, but now he opened up to her, and she just froze. Without saying another word, he turned and walked down the hallway, leaving Emily alone with her chaotic thoughts. She entered the room, locked the door, and threw herself on the bed, running her hands over her face. What was happening to her? She'd never had a serious relationship. She never allowed herself to feel anything for anyone because she knew, in the end, people always left. That had been her life, her entire life. And now Jake showed up, messed everything up, and wanted her to trust him? It was scary. But at the same time, her heart didn't want to run away. And that scared her even more. The next day, Emily tried to act normal. She got dressed, had breakfast alone, and headed to the food event as if nothing had happened. But the truth was, everything had changed. Jake didn't show up for breakfast. He didn't send any messages. And for the first time, Emily realized how much she missed his presence. The morning dragged on. She attended a few tastings, tried to ignore the stares from others, and pretended she wasn't hoping to see Jake any moment. But he didn't show up until, in the late afternoon, the inevitable happened. She was in the main hall, analyzing a dish when she heard a woman's voice beside her. Looks like someone's been left out. Emily closed her eyes for a second before turning around. Madeline was there, wearing a victorious smile. What do you want now? Just checking on you. After your conversation with Jake last night, he seems pretty distant. Emily crossed her arms, feeling her blood boil. What do you mean by that? Madeline gave a sideways smile. Oh, sweetie, you really thought he was going to chase after you? Jake's not the type to wait for anyone. If you don't want to play the game, he'll find someone who will. Emily felt a tightness in her chest, but she kept her expression steady. You seem really concerned about me. Just realistic. Or maybe you're worried because you realize at this time, Jake chose someone he can't control. Madeline narrowed her eyes. You have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, I do. And you know what? I might not know where this is going, but at least I'm not spending my days trying to manipulate others to feel superior. Madeline let out a short laugh. Do you really think he cares about you? Emily held back her anger and took a step forward. I know he cares, but unlike you, I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Before Madeline could respond, Emily turned and walked out of the room, head held high. She might not know everything about Jake, but she knew he wasn't like Madeline. And suddenly she realized she didn't want to run anymore. She wanted to face this head on. That night, Emily couldn't stay still. She knew where Jake was. She knew he was at the hotel's restaurant having dinner with some investors. And she knew she needed to talk to him. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a coat and left the room, walking with determination to the restaurant. As soon as she entered, she saw him. Jake was sitting at the main table, talking to a few men in suits. He looked serious, focused on conversation. But then, as if he felt her presence, his eyes met hers. And in that moment, the world around them disappeared. Emily didn't know if it was her walking or if it was him. She just realized when they were standing face to face, staring at each other in silence. We need to talk, she said straightforward. Jake studied her face for a moment before turning to the investors. Excuse me, gentlemen. And then, without hesitation, he took Emily's hand and led her out of there. They walked in silence through the hotel corridors until they reached the private balcony, where they finally stopped. The cold night air brushed against Emily's skin. But she didn't care, because all that mattered was the man standing in front of her. Jake put his hands in his pockets and watched her. What's going on? Emily took a deep breath. You were right. He furrowed his brow. About what? About me. About me always running away. He stayed silent, waiting. Emily looked at the sky for a moment before meeting his eyes again. I never let anyone get close to me, because I was always afraid that, in the end, people would leave. But you, she swallowed. You made me want to stay. Jake didn't move, but something in his eyes changed. I tried to convince myself that it didn't mean anything, but it does. And as much as that scares me, I don't want to run anymore. The silence between them seemed to carry the weight of the world. Without saying a word, Jake took a step forward and kissed her. It was an intense kiss, filled with everything that had been held back between them for so long. Emily felt his hands holding her face, his lips pressing against hers with an urgency that made her forget everything. Forget the hotel. Forget Paris. Forget the world. The only thing that existed in that moment was him. When they pulled away, Emily's heart was still racing. Jake rested his forehead against hers and smiled slightly. Finally, she laughed, feeling a warm sensation in her chest. Finally, but deep down, Emily knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. Emily couldn't stop smiling. Ever since Jake kissed her, everything around her seemed different. Like, somehow, the world had changed color. She never imagined she'd be here. She never imagined she'd fall for someone like Jake Mitchell. But it happened, and for the first time, she didn't want to run away. That morning, when she went downstairs for breakfast, Jake was already there, sitting at a table reserved for them. Good morning, Carter. Emily smiled and sat down across from him. You're in a good mood. He tilted his head. Are you surprised? She took a piece of toast and bit into it before answering. Let's just say it's unusual. Jake smirked and took a sip of his coffee. So, how do you feel after last night? Emily sighed, crossing her arms over the table. To be honest, still a bit confused. Confused? I've never done this before, Jake. I've never let anyone get this close. He studied her face for a moment before saying, "Me neither." Emily blinked, surprised. Jake always seemed so confident. She never imagined he could also be stepping into unknown territory. "So does that mean we're—" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Together?" She took a deep breath. "Yes." He set his coffee cup aside and looked her straight in the eyes. "If you want to, Carter." She smiled. "I do." Jake leaned over the table. "Great." Then he took her hand and gently squeezed it. Emily felt her heart race. But deep down, she knew the battle wasn't over. Jake's world was an easy place, and some people weren't happy to see them together. That afternoon, as she walked to the hotel, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Since the beginning of the trip, people had been whispering about her, but now something was different. The looks were worse, the expressions more malicious. Then, as she walked past the reception, she overheard two women talking. "Did you see the news?" "Yeah, it's a scandal." Emily frowned and grabbed her phone. She opened the browser, and the second she saw the headline, she felt her blood run cold. CEO Jake Mitchell involved in scandalous romance with former housekeeping employee. She clicked on the article, and the shock only grew. According to insider sources, Emily Carter, former maid at the Mitchell Hotel, was taken on a luxurious trip to Paris and promoted under suspicious circumstances. Sources say the young woman may be using her relationship with the CEO to advance in life. Emily felt her breath quicken. The article wasn't just gossip. It was a direct attack. Then her phone buzzed. "Jake, where are you?" She swallowed and replied, "At the reception." Minutes later, Jake appeared, but he didn't look happy at all. He was holding his phone, and the angry look on his face said it all. "I'm going to find out who did this." Emily let out a humorless laugh. "Do you really need to find out?" Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" She crossed her arms. "Hint. This is Madeline's name written all over it." He pressed his lips together. "I figured that." Emily took a deep breath. "I knew people would talk, but this is different." Jake took her hand. "I'll take care of it." She looked him in the eyes. "How?" He smiled faintly. "My way." That night, Jake called a press conference at the hotel. When Emily entered the room, she saw reporters everywhere. Flashes going off, cameras recording. She had never felt so scared in her life. But then she saw Jake on stage, steady, unshakable. He grabbed the microphone and began. "I know a lot of you are here because of the rumors about me and Emily Carter. So let me clear something up." The whole room went silent. Jake looked directly at the cameras. "Emily Carter wasn't promoted because of a relationship with me. She was promoted because she has undeniable talent and because she's proven over and over that she deserves her place in this world." Emily felt a lump in her throat. Jake continued. "Yes," Emily whispered, her voice trembling but filled with certainty. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jake's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen on him. He slid the ring onto her finger, and the entire restaurant erupted into applause. Emily couldn't stop the tears from streaming down her face as Jake stood up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. The moment felt surreal, like something out of a dream. But it was real. He was real, and their future together was real. When they finally pulled apart, Jake kept his arms around her, his forehead resting against hers. "You've changed everything for me, Emily," he said softly, "and I'm not letting you go." She laughed through her tears, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You're stuck with me now, Mitchell." He grinned. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne, laughter, and quiet moments where they just held each other, soaking in the reality of what had just happened. Emily couldn't stop looking at the ring on her finger, the way it sparkled under the soft lights. It was perfect, just like this moment, just like him. But as the night wound down and they returned to their hotel, Emily's mind began to race. She had never imagined this kind of life for herself. A life with Jake. A life where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving. And now a life as his wife. It was overwhelming in the best way, but it also made her nervous. She had come so far, but there was still so much ahead of them. Jake seemed to sense her thoughts as they sat together on the balcony, the sound of the waves crashing in the distance. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her ring. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. Emily leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Just everything," she admitted. "It's a lot, you know? I never thought I'd be here. With you. Like this." He kissed the top of her head. "I know, but you're not alone in this. We're in it together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it as a team." She smiled, feeling the weight of her worries ease. I liked the sound of that. The next morning, they flew back home, but everything felt different now. Emily wasn't just Emily Carter anymore. She was Emily Carter, the woman who had captured the heart of Jake Mitchell, the woman who was going to marry him. The thought made her giddy and terrified all at once. But as she looked at Jake, who was already back to work on his laptop but still holding her hand, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. When they arrived at the hotel, the staff greeted them with knowing smiles and congratulations. Emily couldn't help but laugh at how quickly the news had spread. Jake, ever the CEO, handled it with his usual calm demeanor, but Emily could see the pride in his eyes whenever someone mentioned their engagement. Over the next few weeks, their lives settled into a new rhythm. Emily continued to work alongside Jake, bringing her unique perspective to the hotel's culinary projects. She was still learning, still growing, but she was no longer afraid to take up space. And Jake was there every step of the way, supporting her, challenging her, and reminding her that she belonged. But life wasn't without its challenges. The media continued to speculate about their relationship, and there were still whispers and judgment from some corners of Jake's world. But Emily had learned to tune it out. She had Jake, and that was all that mattered. Together, they were unstoppable. One evening, as they sat together in their penthouse, planning their wedding, Emily looked at Jake and smiled. "You know, if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here, engaged to you, I would have laughed in their face." Jake chuckled, pulling her closer. "And yet, here we are." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Here we are," she echoed, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "I love you, Jake." He kissed her softly. "I love you too, Emily, more than anything." And in that moment, Emily knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, because they were a team, and that was the most beautiful thing of all. "Yes." Jake smiled, took her hand, and slid the ring onto her finger. He stood up, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her with all the emotion he felt. The restaurant erupted in applause, but Emily could only feel him and the love that filled her entire heart. 2 months later, Emily was walking down the aisle of flower-filled garden, dressed in white, holding a bouquet of flowers in her trembling hands. The wedding took place outdoors, at a private estate with a breathtaking view of the sea. The golden sun was setting on the horizon, creating a scene straight out of a fairy tale. And at the end of the aisle, there he was, Jake, dressed in an elegant suit, with a soft smile and a look full of love. Emily felt the tears come before she even reached the altar. Each step she took was a reminder of the journey she had made to get here, where she started, what she had to face, and how, against all expectations, love found a way to transform her. When she reached Jake, he took her hand and whispered, "You look beautiful." She smiled. "And you're officially stuck with me forever." He chuckled softly, squeezing her hand. And I couldn't be happier about that. The ceremony was emotional. They exchanged heartfelt vows, promises of eternal love, and in the end, the officiant announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Jake didn't wait a second before taking her in his arms and kissing her deeply. The guests applauded, throwing flower petals over them, and Emily knew that this moment would be etched in her memory forever. 2 weeks after the wedding, Emily was in the bedroom, staring at a pregnancy test. She blinked a few times. 2 lines. 2 lines. Her heart raced. Oh my God! She was pregnant. A mix of shock and happiness completely overwhelmed her. She and Jake were going to have a baby. When she heard the bedroom door open, she quickly turned and saw Jake walking in. "Carter, you need to see this. I just got an invite, too." He stopped when he noticed her expression. He frowned. "What's wrong?" Emily took a deep breath. Then she grabbed the test and showed it to him. Jake looked at the object in her hand, blinked a few times, and frowned, not understanding. But then his eyes widened. Is this? Emily smiled. Yes. For a moment he stood still. Then he took a step forward, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her with indescribable emotion. When he pulled away, there were tears in his eyes. We're having a baby. Emily laughed, feeling happiness overflow inside her. We are. Jake wrapped his arms around her, holding her gently. I love you. She smiled, resting her head on his chest. I love you too. And in that moment, she knew this was just the beginning of a new adventure, a new phase of love, growth, and happiness. But this time, it wasn't just her and Jake. Now they were a family. What did you think of Emily and Jake's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, what rating would you give the story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to follow all of our stories. And feel free to watch more emotional stories by clicking here on the final screen.